Hello. Welcome to Happy Nightmares. It's the most wonderful time of the year. Unless, that is, this holiday reminds you of the most horrifying memory of your life. Will the Christmas spirit return? Or will one family's murderous past come back to haunt them years later? We hope you enjoy Black Tags, a holiday horror story.
Somehow, I had let Sheila talk me into putting up a Christmas tree, but she had agreed that no gifts would be exchanged, that no decorations would be put up on the house's exterior, and we would not be opening the door to any would-be carolers. We went through this every year, Sheila and I. This time, she insisted that I needed to begin taking baby steps toward a rejuvenation of the Christmas spirit, for the sake of the boys. My idea was a single sprig of holly hung over the mirror in the guest bathroom, which no one ever used. Her idea was the Christmas tree. The argument, had gotten away from me somehow, and here it was in front of me, glowing like the predatory eyes of a dragon in the corner of my living room. Strands of tinsel drizzled from the rigid branches of the lush noble fir. Silvery reflective balls seemed to float between the needles, stealing the multicolored lights from within the tree and bouncing them onto the walls and ceiling. The result reminded me of light shining through the stained glass windows of St. Bartholomew's, our old family church, which I had not set foot in since the night that forever changed my view of this once happy holiday. Sheila and the twins were still asleep, as they should have been at 2 a.m., even if it was Christmas. I sat in the corner nook of our plush gray sectional sofa, but did not lean back to enjoy the comfort it offered. I sat forward, elbows resting on my knees, through my thick robe. I breathed through my mouth as my jaw hung down in disbelief at what I was seeing. It was impossible. A nightmare come to life beneath the cheery tree. A single box, gift-wrapped with eerie perfection, rested on the faux snow tree skirt. The wrapping paper was shimmering gold, and each fold and crease was so precise that it could have been done by a machine. The thick blood-red ribbon was tied into a bow so flowing and grand that Santa's elves would have admired it with astonishment. But it was the tag which sent chills up my spine and caused my mouth to dry up like the sands of the desert. The tag, emerging from the red bow like a hand from a grave, was solid matte black with nothing written on either side. It shocked my memory in a way that the paper ribbon alone could not have. Insomnia had plagued me incessantly for years now, and I had come downstairs only to grab a glass of water and clear my head. Had I simply drank my water and returned to bed, then Sheila and I could have dealt with this horror in the morning together. But something had drawn me to the Christmas tree, and now I was being forced to relive the worst night of my life. Part 2. Christmas Eve, 2009. My entire family was under one roof, as was customary at that time to celebrate the happiest of holidays. I was 32 years old then and single at the time. My introduction to Sheila was 3 years away at that point, while my two siblings, one older and one younger, had both been married for quite some time. Travis, my older brother, would be celebrating his 11th wedding anniversary in a couple of months with his wife, Marie. Travis and Marie had blessed our family with my two nephews, Connor and Finn, twins born on St. Patrick's Day, and were expecting their third child, who would also be born in March. The twins were 2 years old this Christmas, soon to be 3, and were the energized equivalent of an F3 tornado as they tore through the house screaming about one thing or another. My younger sister, Samantha, had been married for 5 years to her husband, Devin, but they had not yet welcomed children into the world. It seemed that the honeymoon phase of her marriage would never end, which only bothered me during times like these when everyone in the house was kept up at night by their seemingly insatiable physical needs. My mother and I were in the kitchen washing dishes, while my father sat in the living room with the rest of the family. Travis was attempting to read The Night Before Christmas, which was made difficult by the fact that the twins were attempting to beat each other to a pulp on the floor in front of him. I was having one of those moments. My heart was warm, and uncontested joy flowed through my veins at the traditional sounds of a family together for the holidays. When Travis finished reading this story, he shouted out that Mom and I needed to come into the living room for a moment. He informed us with an unnaturally wide smile that he had a gift for each of us that we needed to open tonight, and asked us to wait while he retrieved them from the car. From the look on Marie's face, she had no clue what he was talking about. He disappeared as the twins kicked up a wild game of tag around the coffee table. Travis returned with a massive red velvet bag, much like what the big bearded guy himself would probably have crammed down the chimney later that night as we all slept. One by one, he handed us boxes wrapped in shimmering gold paper tied with thick red ribbon. Protruding from each ribbon was a blank, matte black tag. He asked everyone to refrain from opening their boxes until all of them had been distributed. Once everyone was holding a box, with the exception of the twins and his wife, Travis pulled one final box from the bag. It was wrapped identically to the rest of them, but was about 4 times as big. He set this box on the coffee table and then clasped his hands together as he urged everyone to open their gifts at the same time. Something felt off about his face. The way his eyes were flashing and his smile that just would not retreat even the slightest bit. The boys were screaming with laughter, seemingly unaware that gifts were being opened around them while they had nothing to tear into but each other. I remembered glancing at Marie, who was looking at Travis with a similar concern. The next few minutes have been burned deep into my memories. Mom got hers open first, only by a matter of seconds, and screamed. She dropped the box on the floor, and what appeared to be a human heart tumbled out onto the carpet, leaving a red trail behind it as it rolled. Everyone else had apparently laid eyes on their gifts at pretty much the same time after that. My box contained a single eye, and I felt my stomach contract in upon itself, threatening to be sick if I didn't look away. More screams filled the air as I looked up at Travis in horror. Travis was not screaming, he was laughing hysterically, and as he laughed, he reached forward and began to pull the ribbon on the giant box on the coffee table in front of him. I looked down and saw that the twins had stopped running. They were standing right in front of me, looking quickly from person to person, obviously terrified and confused. I looked back up at Travis. His ice blue eyes were wide and his chest heaved with laughter as he removed the ribbon from the big box and began to pull back the gold wrapping paper. Beside him, Marie was unconscious on the floor. She had fainted. I didn't know what was in that big box, but I knew that Travis's 2 boys didn't need to see whatever it was. I reached down and grabbed each of them around the waist. I turned, a boy under each arm, and ran for the basement door, which was already partially open. I prodded it open the rest of the way with my foot and sprinted down the stairs. I ran through the TV room all the way to the back where I kicked open the door to the unfinished furnace room. Once inside, I turned to close the door, and as my fingers wrapped around the doorknob, the house shook with a massive explosion that sent fire and smoke billowing down the basement staircase. I slammed the door shut, spun around, and knelt down. I placed my hands on the backs of the boys' heads and pulled them close to me, burying their faces in my shoulders as I tried desperately to regain my breath. The boys were crying, sobbing uncontrollably. I hoped to God that they had not seen anything that was in those boxes and had no clue what that loud sound had been. I realized then that I was speaking without even realizing it. "It was just thunder, kiddos. Just thunder, nothing to worry about," I repeated over and over again in various forms. My whole body was shaking, and we stayed that way until the police found us what felt like hours later. Despite my detailed account of that night's events, the investigation had taken months, during which the twins stayed with a foster family. When my innocence was solidified, we were reunited, and I was granted full custody of the boys. Many visits with a child psychologist confirmed my fear that while they seemed unaffected by it now, the boys would likely remember more about the traumatic experience than I'd originally hoped. They might keep it buried, blocked out for years, until something triggered the memory, but there was always the chance that it would come flooding back to them. That was when Christmas ended for me. I had taken the boys on vacations each year and managed to avoid the traditional signs of the holiday for the most part. Sure, they had asked about their parents and grandparents, other members of our family, and the holiday that all of their friends enjoyed. I never gave them the detail they were looking for, especially here the last couple of years, as they were able to figure out that I had largely been avoiding real answers on the subject. Sheila had been a godsend when I met her. She took to the boys so naturally, and they to her, which only made me fall for her even faster. We'd been married after 1 year. She knew how to talk to the boys, to redirect them so that they would not be so curious of the details of that night when their parents had died, while still making them feel they weren't being given the runaround. It was a gift I did not have, and she completed our new family as perfectly as it could be completed. Part 3. It Can't Be. Now, here I was, dumbfounded by the glittering package beneath the tree in front of me. It was an impossibility that Travis had somehow orchestrated this. While the bodies had been decimated by the explosion, they had found his destroyed watch, and it never crossed my mind that he had come back from the dead as a vengeful spirit to finish the job. What kept creeping into my mind were the twins. One of them, or both of them, had remembered. Whatever twisted gene had been dislodged in their father's brain to make him snap had been passed on to them, and when their memory of that night had returned, they had fallen into the same pit of madness that had driven their father to darkness. What could possibly be in that box? Surely a couple of 9-year-olds could not have constructed a bomb, but who was I kidding? Kids could hop on the internet and learn how to do anything these days. They were sharing Connor's smartphones since Finn had lost his a few weeks ago, but either one of them could have snuck onto my laptop to do a little research. No, surely a mental break such as this had not simply flown under the radar. I was with these kids day in and day out, except when they were outside playing. Then I remembered the look on Marie's face as everyone began to open their gifts. She'd had no idea. She was married to the guy and had no clue that he was a psychotic murderer. I stood up sharply and turned away from the tree, meaning to head upstairs, but stopped. I turned back and walked over to the tree. I knelt down and put my hands on either side of the box, knowing that if I moved it, I might end up in pieces all over the living room. What I could not risk was Sheila or the boys coming downstairs and finding the box on their own. If it wasn't the twins' doing, then I had no explanation for what was going on here, and I had to get to the bottom of it before they even knew it was happening. I picked up the box and immediately knew that I was not holding an explosive device. There was not enough weight, and I felt something small move from one side of the box to the other. Since we did not have a basement, I carried the box out to the garage and shoved it behind a portable generator in the corner. It would be hidden there at least for the time being. I returned to the house and went upstairs, first peering into my own bedroom at Sheila. She was still sleeping soundly. I could hear her snoring, and I smiled involuntarily despite everything that was going on. I closed the door gently and moved down the hall to the boys' room at the end. The door was slightly ajar. They normally slept with it closed. I swallowed hard as I approached the door, but did not allow myself hesitation. I pushed the door open lightly, not wanting it to bang against the wall and wake them if they were sleeping. Their bunks sat along the wall to my left, and I could not see into the beds very well until I was in the center of the room. I stepped carefully, not wanting to trip on the various articles of clothing scattered around the floor. I made a mental note that the boys would need to clean their room, and then realized how insane that thought was given the current situation. I could see the back of Connor's head as it rested on his pillow in the top bunk. His comforter was rising and falling slowly with his steady breathing. The bottom bunk was darker, harder to see. Finn seemed to be there, but only appeared as a mound of blankets. I could not tell if it was moving at all. I reached down and pulled back the blankets, expecting to find pillows feigning the appearance of a person. What I found was Finn, curled up and sleeping soundly. He snorted a little and turned over, so I covered him back up and left him be. I crept out of the room and shut the door softly. Standing in the hallway, I pondered the possibilities. Just because they were in their bed did not mean they weren't responsible. As I walked down the hallway and back down the stairs, I tried to think back on anything that might have clued me into a change in one or both of the boys' behavior. I came up empty. They could have found something online, a news story about the night our family was taken from us, but I reviewed their search history regularly and had seen nothing representing a research trail of that nature. I walked into the living room, once again flooded in the warm glow from the Christmas tree, and saw that the box had once again been placed under the tree. "No," I said out loud, and then turned and ran to the garage. I reached behind the generator and my fingers slid across the glossy wrapping paper of the box I'd placed there earlier. The box under the tree was new, and the boys could not have placed it there. Someone else was in my house, with my family. I left the box where it was and ran back into the house, through the kitchen and into the living room, with the intention of hiding the second box. Upon entering the living room, I skidded to a stop and almost cried out. I clasped a hand over my mouth as my eyes scanned the gold-wrapped boxes, which now flowed from beneath the tree. There had to be at least 50 of them. I could not hide them all. There were too many, and even if I tried, it seemed there would be more waiting for me when I returned. I thought about running upstairs, waking up my family and getting them out of the house as soon as possible, but I could not let the boys see what was happening. If the Christmas tree alone hadn't triggered their memory, then this surely would. For years, I had refused to sit and mentally examine the events of that night. In my mind, nothing good would have come from an attempt to determine why Travis had gone off the rails and performed such heinous acts. Now, however, I had no choice. I walked back into the kitchen and sat down at the table. I closed my eyes and returned to my parents' living room. My mother and I had just come in from the kitchen. She was still drying her hands on a towel. My brother was announcing his gifts and walked out the front door to retrieve them from the back of his minivan. I flashed forward a bit in my memory. Travis was setting the large box on the coffee table. I froze the picture and tried to place everyone. I was on the couch now. My mother was sitting next to me, looking down at her awful gift, still wrapped at this point. The boys were mid-chase around the coffee table. Marie was standing next to her husband, looking at him suspiciously. Devin was at the end of the couch, and my dad was in his recliner next to the Christmas tree. Something felt wrong about this, but I couldn't pinpoint why until I rewound the memory a bit. After Travis had left the room, my mother had asked Dad to get the video camera. So why was he in the chair? In my recollection, he was in the chair with his own gold box, of which I never learned the contents. The video camera was nowhere in sight. I remembered him starting to stand up, and then... Samantha. She had told him to sit down, that she would get it. Devin was at the end of the couch, and Samantha should have been sitting between him and Mom, but she wasn't there. I replayed more of the memory as we all started opening our boxes. I heard my mom scream and sucked in a deep breath as the memory stabbed in my gut. Samantha had not returned with the video camera. Mother's box fell to the ground and the heart rolled to a stop beneath the coffee table. The twins had come to a stop in front of me. More screams as other family members saw what was in their boxes, including me. I could hear Travis's laughter as he began to pull the end of his own red bow on the large box that would soon incinerate his family. Samantha still had not returned. She had never come back. Had she been a part of it? How was it possible that I had not seen any of this coming? I had dinner with my sister once a week, far more often than Travis. We spoke on the phone regularly. It was impossible that I would not have noticed a single difference in the way she spoke or her general demeanor. "Kevin," a voice whispered. I was jolted back to reality. My eyes shot open and I saw Samantha sitting at the kitchen table across from me. I stood up quickly, knocking my chair to the ceramic tile floor with a noisy clatter, and moved away from her. Samantha, how?" I stuttered. She remained seated but smiled up at me through disheveled strands of wild hair. The room was dark. I had not turned on any lights when I came in. Her arms were on the table in front of her, hands folded neatly over one another, but now she pushed away from the table and leaned back in her chair. She lifted her right leg and crossed it over her left, resting her right ankle on her left knee. Her fingers wrapped around her right shin, holding the leg in place. "What?" she said. "You trying to figure out why your sister wasn't in the room when the bomb went off?" I just stared at her, frozen in shock and fear. Surely someone like her wouldn't have been involved in such terrible plans. Not sweet little Samantha, the baby of the family, the spoiled one, the teacher's pet, so innocent. Sure, they never found any pieces of her in that mess, but that meant nothing. "She?" I muttered. "She ran!" Samantha screeched, standing up abruptly. I took a step backward. Dad never put anything back where it was supposed to be, so while she was hunting for the camera like an idiot, the whole thing went down and she took off like the selfish little priss she was. "Travis. Welcome to the party, Kev. Long time." "No, that isn't possible. You killed yourself. You went nuts and killed yourself along with everyone else." "Almost, but not quite. You snatched up my boys, and Sam took off out the back door for help. I'm not entirely sure how everything went down. I've never been big into all of that ghouls and ghosts crap, but after the explosion I found her, running down the sidewalk screaming for help. I shut her up quickly, and as I tried to figure out what to do with her, I suddenly realized that I was not just holding on to her as I thought I was. I was inside of her. I had become her. I had complete control over her." No. It was all I could say. I started back toward the house, but lights had begun turning on in the houses around me. I heard sirens approaching, so I hid. I watched as they fought against the burning house. I stared in disbelief as you and my sons walked out of the house without a scratch. "I saved their lives," I said. "They weren't supposed to be saved." Travis, somehow in control of Samantha's body, began moving around the table toward me. You think I didn't know how demented I was? I was completely aware of the darkness growing inside of me, and I was powerless to stop it, but I wasn't about to let the same thing happen to my boys. Madness like mine doesn't just go away. I couldn't just kill myself and be done with it. I had to make sure that whatever snap of DNA had caused this mental defect would be gone for good. It could have been in any of you, lying dormant, waiting to be awakened like mine was. You all had to be exterminated. "They're your children," I yelled, stepping forward. "We're your family. You could have come to us for help." No, there was no help. In any case, it took a little longer than expected to get a grasp on this new life I'd been given. But I think I've got the hang of it now. "Why didn't you just come after us?" "I think you missed the part where I became a psychopath. Where do you think all of those body parts had come from? I'd been killing for years without getting caught. I may have wanted to stop it from spreading, but that doesn't mean I didn't enjoy every single scream." Samantha's body lunged at me, opening her mouth and making as if she was going to rip my throat out with her teeth. I dodged to the side, pushing her away from me so that she crashed into the counter and ran from the room. I needed to get this monster out of my house and away from the kids. I could hear her running after me through the living room, and without stopping, I threw open the front door and plunged into the dark, cold, early hours of Christmas Day. I ran into the middle of my front yard and then turned to confront my sister or brother or whatever the hell it was. There was no one. I was alone, which meant that Travis had not followed me out of the house. He was still in there, and I was not the only one who needed to be killed. "Travis, no!" I shouted, and sprinted back toward the house. He wasn't in the living room. I ran to the kitchen, but he wasn't there either. I was up the stairs and down the hall faster than I ever thought I could move, and there he was, in my sister's body, standing in the middle of the twins' room watching them sleep. Samantha's head snapped toward me as I stood in the doorway, and I saw that her eyes were ice blue. Not her eyes at all. It was Travis looking at me. Any doubt left my mind at that moment. "They aren't like you," I said. "They won't be. I won't let it happen." "You can't possibly know that. I know them better than I ever knew you. I know what to look for now. You don't need to do this." "And when you suddenly find one of them has killed a cat or a dog, or you find one of them watching strangely violent videos online, what then?" "Then I get them the help that we could have gotten you." "You mean they spend the rest of their lives in a padded cell? It's better than what you have planned." We stared into each other's eyes, trying to assess the other's next move, when a much smaller voice broke the silence and sent a fresh wave of dread through me. "Uncle Kev?" Connor spoke from the top bunk. He sat up and was rubbing his eyes. "What's going on?" "Go back to sleep, buddy," I said. "Connor?" Travis spoke in Samantha's voice. I ran to the bunks and stood between the boys and their maniac father. "Who is that?" the boy said, still trying to wake up. "You've gotten so big," Travis said. "Leave," I said. "I can't do that." "Yes, you can, and you will. You will let these boys live their lives, and you will trust me to keep them from harm. I'm still your brother, and that has to count for something." "And what if you become the monster?" Travis spat. I thought about that for a moment. I'll tell them everything. We will look out for each other. Sheila will look out for all of us. Believe it or not, we are still a family." Travis's eyes looked above me. I turned and looked at Connor, who was squinting through the darkness at this person he had never met, but seemed to recognize just the same. I expected him to recognize Samantha from pictures, but instead, he completely caught me by surprise. "Dad?" he said. My breath caught in my throat, and I turned in time to see Travis take a step backward. The expression on Samantha's face turned from anger to fear and uncertainty. I heard movement to my left and turned my head in time to see Sheila approach the room. I raised a finger to my lips, motioning for her to stay quiet. Travis's eyes were still locked on Connor's. "Connor, come down here for a second," I said calmly. He looked at me for a moment, and then made his way down the bunk's ladder. He stood beside me, and I put an arm on his shoulder. I glanced at the bottom bunk, thankful that Finn was such a sound sleeper. I had to practically pour a bucket of ice water on that kid to get him up in the morning. "Travis, this is your son," I said. "He loves riding his bike and collects baseball cards because you did, even though he hates watching it on TV and hates playing it even more. He's a whiz at math and has a wicked crush on Jennifer Aniston, even though she's like 40 years older than he is." Connor looked up at me as if what I had just said was way more horrific than the fact that his dead father had possessed his supposedly dead aunt. "He's a boy who has his whole life in front of him. He got half of his genes from you, but not all of them. His brother is crazy good on a skateboard and loves to read. They deserve to live. Let them live." Travis did not look at me while I spoke. His eyes remained on his son. He took another step backward. Eventually, he looked up at me and then back down at his son. I watched as the ice blue eyes began to fade, being replaced by the rich brown eyes that my sister Samantha had been born with. Her eyelids drooped, and I saw her knees give out. I ran across the room in time to catch her before she hit the floor and gently laid her down. Once she was on the floor, I tucked 2 fingers under her jawline and felt for a pulse. It was there, barely. Call 911, I said. Part 4. Epilogue. We followed as the paramedics took Samantha downstairs and out to the ambulance on a stretcher. As we passed through the living room, I saw that the black tagged boxes were gone. Or more likely, were never really there, to begin with. I looked at the Christmas tree, a still glowing symbol which meant something vastly different for us than it did for most. Samantha did not remember anything after running away from the explosion 7 years ago. She had not been aware of anything since Travis had possessed her. It was as if she had been in a coma this entire time. She underwent psychiatric evaluations for a long time, and it took her quite a while to adjust and make peace with what had really taken place. As I promised my brother, Sheila and I explained everything to the boys shortly after they turned 10. I told them that we would all be seeing a therapist on a regular basis. Someone who was trained to look for warning signs in each of us so that we would never have to go through what their father went through. It seemed as though we might have a shot at a semi-normal life and could, at least to some extent, put this all behind us. It was months later, in the summer of 2017, when a huge storm hit. Winds raged and horizontal rain pelted the side of the house. Lightning seemed to light up the sky without rest, and thunder blasts shook the house. The thunder was a little too reminiscent of that horrible explosion for my liking. When the power went out, suddenly we all gasped, and then laughed a little. We were prepared with flashlights at the ready, so we were not left in darkness for long. Finn switched on his camping lantern, which lit almost the entire room. "I'll be right back," I said, and left the boys with Sheila as I made my way to the garage. We were planning to have a cookout that weekend, as long as the rain stopped, and I had stocked the garage fridge with meat that I did not want to spoil. If I could get the old generator running, I could vent it out of the garage, and that would at least be one less thing to worry about. The beam from my flashlight was not overly helpful as I tripped over a bucket making my way to the far corner of the garage, where the generator sat, covered in cobwebs. Metal shrieked as I lifted the handle and raised the front end of the generator off the ground so that I could roll it forward on the rear wheels. As I pulled, I heard something fall to the ground. I let the handle fall and leaned over the generator, shining the flashlight into the corner of the garage. The bright beam reflected back to me from shiny gold wrapping paper. The first box I had stumbled upon on the night of Travis's return. It had not disappeared like the others. But why not? Obviously, the presence had been some sort of supernatural trick of the mind, a way for Travis to torment me before finishing what he had started 7 years before. But here it was, as real as anything. I reached down and picked up the box, and as I did, I felt something slide from one side to the other, just as it had before. I took a deep breath and pulled the ribbon. The black tag fluttered down, coming to rest on top of the generator. I dropped the ribbon to the floor next to me and ripped the gold paper away. The paper landed at my feet, and I was now holding a plain brown cardboard box. "He's gone," I said to myself, trying to prepare for whatever grotesque display might have been festering in this box. I pulled the cardboard flaps one by one until the box was open, then held up the flashlight and saw a cell phone lying in the bottom of the box. "What?" I said out loud. I reached into the box and pulled out the phone, and then let the box drop to the floor. I powered up the phone in my left hand while I held the flashlight in my right, certain that nothing would happen, that the battery had to be dead. The white apple symbol glowed at me for a moment, and then the screen came on. It was not password protected, and I immediately recognized that it was Finn's phone by the Batman logo he used as his background. A notification obscured the bat symbol, informing me that Finn's storage was almost full. He only had a handful of apps, leading me to wonder what could possibly be taking up so much space. I opened his photos, and the very first one nearly stopped my heart. It was a selfie of Finn and his Aunt Samantha that had to have been taken during the time when she was still believed to be dead. Finn had lost his phone weeks before that Christmas, And if it had been in this box... I flipped through more pictures, each one more disturbing than the last. Pictures of Finn with dead animals, candid photos of me and Sheila and Connor, more selfies of the two of them with blood-stained shirts and hands. I dropped the phone to the ground and stared into the pitch-black garage. That was when I heard Sheila scream.
One can never know what darkness lurks in the depths of their DNA. Travis was incapable of stopping the maniac bursting forth from within him, even in death. We hope you enjoyed Black Tags, a holiday horror story. Thank you so much for listening. Merry Christmas. Come back soon, and, as always, happy nightmares.